Good evening, everyone. Guten Abend alle. I'm Josephine van Beeselaere. I'm Head of EU Affairs at the European Heat Pump Association, and I'm very pleased and honored to welcome you tonight on behalf of the European Heat Pump Association, Stiebel Eltron, and the Lower Saxony region here at this very timely event on the heat pump sector. It is a very timely event because we have seen sales increases for the last 10 years in the heat pump sector, and in 2023, for the first time, a sales decrease. And this is taking place also at a time when we see increasing backlash towards green policies, both at EU and different national levels. But it's important to remember that the heat pump sector is not only important for our energy and climate targets, but also for our competitiveness. So let's discuss tonight with policymakers, with industry and other stakeholders, how to ensure a positive narrative and also how to ensure a constant growth and the support of citizens, policymakers and broader stakeholder groups for our sector. So I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the evening, and I will stop here because we actually have planned proper opening speeches. So I would like to invite the first opening speaker to the podium. Mr. Michael Freericks, he's head of the Lower Saxony representation in Brussels. Thanks again for hosting this event. Mr. Freericks has been working in Brussels since 1993, and in 2007 he became the head of representation of Lower Saxony to the EU. So he has a lot of experience in representing the interests of German Länder in Brussels. And then secondly, we will have an online opening speech given via video call by Mr. Fabian Hüssing. He's project manager at the Institute for Solar Energy Research, and he focuses his work on heat pumps. Please, Mr. Freericks.
Yeah, thank you, Josephine, for your kind introduction. Hopefully I can fulfill the expectations now of the audience regarding the 30 years of experience about how to represent German interests in Brussels. Well, distinguished audience, distinguished panelists, dear Mr. Lange, dear Mr. Schiefelbein, dear Mr. Moser, dear Mr. Esser, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, a very warm welcome to the representation of Lower Saxony here in Brussels to this, as mentioned before, timely event. Secondly, I regret to inform you that the Secretary of State for European Affairs, Mr. Wunderling-Weilby, who planned to be here, was unfortunately is not able to join us tonight due to an unforeseen and but urgent appointment in Hanover. So he asked me to replace him, and I'm happy to present his ideas to you now. Well, so let me please dive into the subject now. Improving energy efficiency is a particularly crucial task within the context of the energy transition and in achieving climate protection goals. Significant potential lies in building renovation, as buildings account for around 40% of Germany's energy consumption and about 1/3 of the CO2 emissions. Through energy efficiency, building renovation energy consumption is reduced, resulting in long-term financial relief for consumers. Therefore, we all are aware of the central role of the heating sector and the challenges in decarbonizing this sector. More than 70% of heating energy is still generated using fossil fuels, primarily natural gas. Heat pumps are a leading technology for addressing the decarbonization challenges of heating and cooling, district heating networks, and increasingly, industrial applications. Heat pumps are praised for their high efficiency and utilization as a renewable energy source. They also play a crucial role in ensuring grid stability and balance. Therefore, heat pumps must replace fossil heating boilers without further delay. The introduction of heat pumps should be part of local, regional and national heating and cooling plans as envisaged in the Energy Efficiency Directive and the Renewable Energy Directive. The deployment should be flexible enough to adapt the needs and constraints of buildings, industry, and networks. We see that the transition in the heating sector has begun, with robust market growth in recent years and nearly 3 million newly installed heat pumps units in 2022. However, growth slowed in 2023. Market deployment is still not happening quickly enough. Therefore, policymakers and markets need a clear, long-term vision to engage consumers. We must accelerate the decarbonization of heating and cooling using all available technologies. And we don't have to start from scratch. At European level, much has been accomplished in recent years. The Fit for 55 package was developed to respond to the complex challenges of decarbonization with market instruments, research, and innovation. REPowerEU accelerated the transition, calling for a doubling of building heat pumps. New regulations in the Building Energy Efficiency Directive, as new emissions trading system for buildings and faster approval regulations for renewable energy have paved the way for accelerated heat pumps development. The revised Building Energy Efficiency Directive expands obligations for implementing energy efficiency measures, increasing demand for new solutions, including heat pumps. New requirements for zero-emission buildings, as well as the phasing out of subsidies for fossil devices, are intended to facilitate the gradual phase-out of fossil heating boilers. However, to achieve wider development of heat pumps in district heating, technical and economic challenges still need to be overcome. The revised Renewable Energy Directive includes new ambitious targets in general, but also specifically for accelerating the deployment of renewable energy in the heating and cooling sector, for the first time with binding national targets. This will be a strong driver for the use of heat pumps in all sectors. Ladies and gentlemen, heat pumps are one of the technologies supported by the Net Zero Industry Act. This creates a legal framework to streamline approval procedures and improve market access for net zero industries. The Net Zero Industry Act will also help increase the production of clean energy technologies in the EU and ensure that the Union is well equipped for the transition to clean energy. It can also strengthen in energy and supply chain, as well as green growth and green jobs in the EU. A very good example of transformation is the repurposing of a Conti plant in Gifhorn, from brake production to the manufacturing of stainless steel tanks for heat pump systems. Stiebel Eltron takes over parts of the production facilities, thus also creating employment prospects for more than 300 employees and providing them and their families with future opportunities. The state of Lower Saxony supports the necessary investments for the construction and conversion of the new production. In addition to this comprehensive package of initiatives, the Commission is currently working on a heat pump action plan. It aims to accelerate the deployment of heat pumps and lay the groundwork for heat pumps to gradually become the new boilers. The action plan is intended to create the necessary legal framework for national, regional and local authorities to introduce heat pumps and demonstrate ways to tailor them to the individual needs of citizens. This will be a first step in bringing clean energy into citizens' homes. However, the publication of the action plan is still pending. A reliable legal framework is urgently necessary for the further development of the heat pump market. Ladies and gentlemen, sustainable commitment from all market actors, including national, regional and local authorities, financial institutions, as well as research and educational institutions are also required. Only together they can heat transition fulfill the requirements which are necessary to implement the heat transition. Today's event aims to highlight the challenges at the EU and regional levels and what regions can contribute to the success of the heat transition or how the EU can support them. Events like this are of great importance. A swift transition to green energy while ensuring energy supply security and affordability can only be achieved collectively with all stakeholders. Well, in this spirit, I wish all of us insightful and fruitful discussion tonight. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mr. Freericks. I would start now. Thank you for the kind invitation and the opportunity to speak at this event. I am Fabian Hüsing, Research Assistant at the Institute for Solar Energy Research in Hamelin and Project Manager in the Heat Pumps Working Group. Mr. Freericks correctly mentioned the significance of decarbonizing heat supply in buildings for transition towards renewable energies. We are looking at 1/3 of our final energy demand and one of the most urgent and substantial tasks for the energy transition, or Energiewende as we call it in German. The scenarios for future energy systems show a clear scientific consensus that heat pumps are the key technology for renewable heat in buildings as well as in heating networks. This is due to the fact that heat pumps take a large part of the heat they provide to applications out of the environment in their vicinity. Lower Saxony has a lot of detached buildings, favorable conditions for the use of near-surface geothermal energy, and a really high level of renewable electricity, optimal conditions for the use of heat pumps. However, the implementation has not yet reached sufficient levels. Today, I'm speaking to you on behalf of the Wärmepumpeninitiative Niedersachsen, WIN, an initiative of several state institutions in Lower Saxony. Namely, these are the Energieforschungszentrum Niedersachsen, Institute of Thermodynamics of Leibniz-Universität Hannover, die Klima- und Energieschutzagentur Niedersachsen, and the Institute of Solar Energy Research, where I am working, funded by Lower Saxony's Ministry for the Environment, Energy and Climate Protection, which I'm very grateful for. Our aim as the WIN network is to establish efficiently operated heat pump systems as a key technology in the transformation towards renewable heating in Lower Saxony through research and development, as well as education and information. I'm convinced that for a successful heat transition, there are several tasks that have to be completed by specific stakeholders or even society as a whole. First and foremost, the public needs to be aware of the unique potentials heat pumps offer for emission-free and import-independent heat supply. Furthermore, a paradigm shift is needed. Heating systems must be operated efficiently, which is not the case today. Planners and implementers, as well as users, need to know the characteristics of heat pumps to ensure efficient usage. Competent support for first-time users is needed. Producers, implementers, energy suppliers, and researchers need to join efforts to reduce costs. This includes components and installation prices, as well as the large part of operating costs, because the purchase of electric energy is quite expensive today. Applied research needs to develop standardized implementation processes to accelerate the transition, and this is what we are talking about today. And at the same time, broad-scale performance monitoring needs to evaluate the successes and allow to adapt policies where needed. This brings me to my last point, but definitely not the least one. Legislators need to make sure that reliable legislation and funding provide security of investment, because heating systems are generational investment. This task explicitly includes the challenge of implementing the transition in a socially just manner. So it's a big task. A lot of tasks to do, but I want to make very clear, heat pumps provide a great solution with a relatively high technical majority to one of the greatest challenges of our time. And we need to ensure to use the potentials efficiently. To do so, it takes joint efforts and close coordination. The WIN network supports networking of relevant stakeholders and offers independently prepared information from science and practice, vice versa. By doing so, we try to ensure that crucial knowledge reaches the important places in good time. And I think this is important because we are talking about a great transition. So I'm happy to offer neutral information and competent contacts wherever possible, and I'm delighted to attend this event and wish you all a pleasant evening and constructive discussions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Freericks and Mr. Hüssing. I just want to react on the speech of Mr. Hüssing by saying that the 6 actions he mentions are actually very closely in line with the actions that we, as the European Heat Pump Association, have also proposed in June to the Commission in the framework of this Heat Pump Accelerator. So that's very nice to see the parallel there. Now I would like to invite the speakers for the panel to the stage. First of all, we have the member of the European Parliament, Mr. Bernd Lange. Welcome, Mr. Lange. So, Mr. Lange is a German MEP from the Lower Saxony region and from the S&D group. He has been an MEP from 1994 to 2004 and again since 2009. And since 2014, he is chairman of the International Trade Committee. Welcome. Secondly, I would like to welcome Mr. Stefan Moser. He's head of Unit B3 in the in DG Energy of the European Commission. And this is the unit responsible for buildings and products, and among others, for the eco-design legislation and for the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. So for the heat pump sector, this is really a very important unit in the European Commission. So welcome, Mr. Moser. Then thirdly, I would like to invite Mr. Charles Esser. He is Secretary General of ETSO, the European Distribution System Operators Association. He's replacing his colleague, Ms. Tseni Varfi, who had to cancel last minute. So we're very grateful that you could join us at such a late time. So ETSO promotes the increase in the use of clean energy sources through electrification and the development of smart and digital grid technologies. And the association gathers around 36 electricity distribution system operators. Welcome, Mr. Esser. And then last, but in this case certainly not least, I would like to welcome Dr. Kai Schiefelbein, who is the CEO of Stiebel Eltron. Stiebel Eltron is a German heat pump manufacturer based in the Lower Saxony region. The company was founded in 1924, has a turnover of 1.1 billion euros and employs around 6,000 people worldwide. Dr. Schiefelbein has been working for Stiebel Eltron since 1997, starting as a heating equipment development engineer and further developing within the company until he became a CEO in 2012. Welcome, Dr. Schiefelbein. So I will try to make sure I see you and also the public. Okay. It's a bit, yeah, okay, but we will manage. First of all, I would like to refer to what I mentioned completely in the beginning of the evening. So the past few months we have been quite turbulent for our sector. So policies have been changing, and also the market has seen a slowdown. So I would like to first get a bit of a general impression of Dr. Schiefelbein from the manufacturer's perspective. So could you start by giving us an overview of the evolution of the heat pump market in the past year, the past months, and how do you look at the current status and the next months?
Of course I can. We did have quite a sustainable and continuous growth in the heat pump market since, let's say, 2001 actually. until maybe 2021. Then, with the start of the Russian aggression against the Ukraine, the heat pump market has gone completely crazy, peaking in 2022. And then with a decline of the market in the second half of 2023, when the reasons for buying heat pumps, like it would save lives, have no longer been present. So in 2022, a lot of people thought either they buy a heat pump or they will have a cold house in winter. And this happened Europe-wide. This happened in Eastern Europe, this happened in a lot of Western European countries, and it certainly also happened in Germany. Then the result was that the market was very, very strong until the middle of 2023. And then all the wholesalers stocked heat pumps like hell in the situation where the manufacturers, at least the European manufacturers, couldn't deliver enough heat pumps. So instead of installing the heat pumps, they went into the stocks of the market partners. And a lot of wholesalers also ordered huge quantities of Asian heat pumps in containers because they thought that it would go on like this. Obviously, and of course, it didn't. So in Europe, the heat pump market has already been decreasing in 2023 compared to 2022 by 5%. In Germany, the year 2023 still was a record year with 360,000 heat pumps sold, according to the statistics. To be a bit more precise, 360,000 heat pumps were sold into the supply chain, with a lot of them still being on the stock somewhere, either at the wholesalers or at the side of the installers. Then, in the second half of the year, the markets have been going down steeply. So in Germany, the first half of the year was so good that the total year still looked beautiful, but of course it wasn't. And if we are looking at the market nowadays, in the beginning of 2024, then we do see very weak heat pump markets. Europe-wide, the figures are not yet published, but I think it's a good guess to say that the heat pump market is somewhere around 40% lower than it was at the same time of the year 2023. In Germany, we know it for sure because the market figures have been published for January at least, and the figures for February will not look more beautiful. So in Germany, the heat pump market has gone down compared to 2023 by 42%, with the total heating market going down only 12%, and the oil boiler sales increasing by 42%, and the gas boiler sales increasing by 5%. So what we do see in Germany at present, and I think that's quite exemplary also for other European markets, is that fossil fuel heating systems are again sold more, and that the heat pump market is going down. The reasons for it are, of course, not too simple. Basically, there are three big reasons. Reason number one is unfavorable energy prices, especially a bad ratio between electricity and gas prices. You can say that as soon as the ratio between electricity and gas goes down below 2.5, so electricity per kilowatt hour only being 2.5 times as expensive as the kilowatt hour of gas, the heat pump market becomes self-sustaining. Then it works also in the renovation business. If the electricity price is 3 times higher than the gas price or even higher, then you can say it's something of a death zone for the heat pump. We have seen this many, many years in Germany and in other markets, that you can directly correlate the heat pump sales with a ratio between electricity and gas prices. This is reason number one. Electricity prices compared to the gas prices in a lot of European countries currently are not favorable, and you can say that the energy transition is a bit eating its own children. Because if you want to replace fossil fuels with renewable electricity, then it's a good idea to make it attractive for the end customer. And it's definitely a bad idea to push the end customer into using fossil fuels because it's cheaper. That's reason one. Reason number two is that there has been some political volatility in a lot of European countries announcing the phase out of fossil fuels. If you announce the phase out of fossil fuel boilers in the market, then what happens is that people panic and buy fossil fuel boilers because they believe it's the economic choice. So they replace still working gas and oil boilers by new gas and oil boilers because they believe that it's a smart move to save their money. Obviously, medium term, long term, it most probably will not be a smart move, but explain this to someone who is very keen on saving money. So political volatility, announcing to forbid fossil fuel boilers in the near future, then in most countries actually not doing it, or at least not doing it as quickly as it was announced, and then promising attractive subsidies that later come in place, okay, but there is always a transition period. The worst thing you can do to a market in autumn or in the winter season is you announce attractive subsidies that will come later, because then everyone will be waiting. That is what we have seen all over Europe and what we are still seeing all over Europe, although in some countries like Austria or Germany, attractive subsidy programs are in place now, but the money is still not available, so people are still waiting. And then there is a third reason, and the third reason is definitely not the fault of politicians, but the fault of the, let's say, of the whole industry or the whole supply chain, and that's the huge stock that is existing everywhere. Because obviously the heat pumps that are in the statistics are the heat pumps brought into the market by the manufacturers or by the importers of heat pumps. And if a huge number of heat pumps is on stock at the wholesalers and at the side of the installers, then obviously these heat pumps are preventing new heat pumps from being delivered into the supply chain and from being registered in the statistics. So the actual market of heat pumps being installed at the side of the end customer need not be as bad as the market figures look like, because there are enough stocked in the supply chain. Nevertheless, for the industry, of course, the situation is no fun at all, because if we can't sell heat pumps, we do not have sales. If we do not have sales, we do not have turnover. If we do not have turnover, we have cash flow problems. And if we have cash flow problems, medium term, we will also have problems with the result of the companies. And then, having promised to politics to ramp up the heat pump production, all of us have credit financed their investments. And then the smarter among you will know that if you finance an investment, then the bank gives you some covenants. Basically, these covenants are mostly that they compare the credit volume or the debt volume to the EBITDA or to some earnings. And then if the earnings go down because the market goes down, then obviously this covenant doesn't move in the right direction. So even if the market disruptions have 3 reasons and only 2 of them can be assigned to politicians, it's still true that the industry does have some problems. That's a market overview in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. Now let's go from the market perspective to more the policy perspective, and I would like to start with MEP Bernd Lange. Yes, as I mentioned, and was also mentioned by other people before, we don't not only see a decrease in sales, but we also see a backlash in different European countries and also at EU level against green policies. There's quite some changes in the narrative. What are your feelings about the future direction of the European Parliament on topics such as the Green Deal?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation. For me, it's totally clear that we have a legal framework which stands. And regarding heat pumps, we have the regulation for renewable energy, for energy efficiency, and for buildings. And above that, we have the emission trading system, point 2, also for mobility and buildings. So I guess the legal framework is there, and there is no really tendency to have a rollback on that. And I guess we should be also quite clear that there is no rollback, because as we heard just before, industry needs really stability. And I guess that's really the crucial element. And in my point of view, the instability of subsidies, of regulation, also in Germany, for example, led also to an uncertainty for the customers to buy heat pumps. Regarding the legal framework, I guess the direction is totally clear. That will be heat pumps. Not tomorrow, but at least for 2030. And we also looked to the construction of heat pumps. So not all heat pumps are really the top of the technique. So we had also a discussion about the F gases and the improvement to make heat pumps all as environment friendly as possible. And we reached also a compromise in really going ahead also on the European side with really good heat pump performance. And this is, of course, also a little bit industrial policy. We want to secure industrial jobs here in Europe, and especially the medium-sized companies producing heat pumps. And you know, a competitor of Stiebel Eltron is now not a European company anymore. And I guess we should be really secure the situation for companies in Europe, specifically regarding also some unfair trading practices in the United States and the subsidies given in the United States. So I can only mention to the financial services that they should have a really clear look also regarding this perspective to secure industrial workplace in Europe. So, of course, there will be a discussion how to go further. After this legislation for 2030, we will have a next target, not 55% as we had it for 2030, perhaps 90% for 2040, and then climate neutral in 2050. And we will discuss some further measures. But it's totally clear the framework for 2030, it stands, and there will be no rollback. And I'm sure that we will have a quite strong discussion about the Green Deal in a quite different field, in the agriculture field. So we will have the discussion about the natural restoration law quite soon. Tonight I have a trialogue about tariff benefits for agricultural products coming from Ukraine and so on. So farmers have a strong lobby, and there will be a discussion about the future of the Green Deal in the field of agriculture. That's for sure. But I see no danger for heat pump. Heat pump will be the solution, perhaps not tomorrow, but in 2030.
Okay, thank you very much. Then I want to continue on the policy side with Mr. Moser. It has already been mentioned by Mr. Lange. There has been a lot done by the EU, by proposals of the European Commission, which all now have been agreed in the Green Deal, the Fit for 55 package. But again, in the last months, we've seen the narrative a bit changing. The Heat Pump Action Plan has been postponed or for consideration by the incoming Commission, and more focus is put on this the competitiveness aspect of the European industry. How do you look, Mr. Moser, at the next legislative period from the Commission's perspective?
Thank you very much, Josephine. Good evening to all of you, Mr. Freericks, for welcoming us here in your very nice representation of Lower Saxony. And I'm very happy to discuss with you. So I fully agree with what Mr. Lange said. The Green Deal legislative side is basically done for buildings. We now need to implement it. And what Dr. Stiefel-Bein said, in respect to market development is of course unfortunate for companies, because you always take decisions under uncertainty. You take business risks. This was not what we were hoping for, but it just shows how much it is important and how strongly we need to emphasize now that member states, in the implementation of the Fit for 55 legislative package, create stability, continuity and predictability through the measures to be taken, the transposition of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, the Renewable Energy Directive, Energy Efficiency Directive, and of course the operation of the emissions trading scheme needs to work and needs to be left to some extent then alone, and not there cannot be interference basically later on by questioning some of the effects. The effects of the ETS will certainly be increasing fossil fuel prices for consumers, which will in some cases even create hardships. Yeah? So people who have underestimated now by now quickly purchasing still and installing a fossil fuel solution, that they will be negatively surprised, and then there may be even calls for saying, well, now the gas prices are so high, or the oil prices, let's do something about that. We'll have to resist to that, because that's part of the design. We need ambitious and up to the job national plans for building renovations. That is something which member states need to do in close consultation with the stakeholders, industry, consumers, citizens, the different levels of the public administration, notably the cities, but also the installers, to see really what are the barriers, how do we overcome those barriers, and then also bringing in private financing institutions, banks basically into the picture, providing high quality information to consumers, to citizens, to the cities, and also work on high quality heat and cool planning at the city level. So this is implementation of legislative texts which have been all now adopted by the European Parliament. The last one was the EPBD just on Tuesday last week. Now still the Council needs to validate it and approve it, but then it will enter into effect and needs to be implemented. So I don't see a rollback of this in any way. I fully agree with Mr. Lange also on where there will be further discussions, but not in this sector. What basically we now need to make sure is that industry can also, in particular the heat pump producers, can endure these difficult situation in which they're in now, that there has been, I would say, a more than expected reduction of market uptake, which partly, I would say, has been caused by the crisis situation in which we were in, a kind of hype during the war when it started, but then a kind of, I would say, relaxation of many people thinking now the crisis is over in terms of energy. Of course, the war, unfortunately, tragically continues, but the impact on people is no longer there in such a manner that there's a huge price increase. Prices have gone back very strongly to previous levels. There is now, fortunately, I would say, a relatively stable supply, so there's no crisis scenario anymore in terms of energy security, with the efforts which have been taken, fortunately successful also, because we don't want an energy crisis, but we need to drive forward the decarbonization, the climate action in a structured, continued and persistent manner with the member states. And there will be lots of actions for the member states to take, notably the price relationship between gas and electricity. This is a member state prerogative. They can take action and should take action, even by implementing the existing or the now newly agreed legislative framework, but also the different barriers which exist. And the heat pump action plan, indeed, I mean, we had intended to bring it forward still under this college, but this is mostly, I would say, an institutional question also, up to what point is it most appropriate for the outgoing commission still to provide an action plan looking into the future, which in many ways is primarily an implementation action plan, because normally the incoming college does that to bind itself, but also to define the agenda. There will have to be, I would say, well thought through action on and rethinking on system integration, but also heating and cooling, and heat pumps are part of that. What else needs to be done, basically? And there we come also in the agenda of competitiveness. We have now the Net Zero Industry Act, needs to be implemented, but also simplification. All these different texts have been agreed, but of course, lots of things on the table at the same time. So we will have to think about how to optimize the interplay still through also the revision of the governance regulation, which will need to be updated anyway. So there will be a scope for simplification, thinking about competitiveness, making it even better. But in terms of substance, this will remain. This will not be rolled back. So there's no, I would say, questioning by anybody of the agenda to decarbonize as such.
Thank you very much. Before I let the others react, I would also like to bring in Mr. Esser for a more specific point of view, namely the point of view of the DSOs, of the distribution operators, because one of the criticisms we often hear is that, okay, if all these heat pumps are connected, all this electrification happens, the grid will not cope, or we cannot do this. How do you look at this from a DSO perspective?
Thank you. First of all, good evening, and thanks to EHPA for inviting EDSO, and thank you to representation of Lower Saxony for hosting this event. I mean, just to start out, I mean, you said we're 36, but just to give an idea, we're the 36 sort of largest and medium size. So actually, our members are the majority of connections, electricity connections in the EU, even though there are actually several thousand DSOs in electricity DSOs in Europe. I think one thing is I'll just start off by saying is we as EDSO we need to do more on heat pumps, because I realized we were actually talking about this the other day internally, and we realized we had two groups working on electric vehicles and no group working on heat pumps. And to a certain extent, sometimes distribution system operators might see those as well affecting the grid in quite similar ways. But, and I'll get back to that in a second, but it's not exactly the same. And so we do need to look at that more closely. So it's something actually that we want to look at more closely within our, as an association, who obviously we do representation for our members here in Brussels, but a lot of what we do as an association is internal knowledge sharing, internal learning, and so I would say that heat pumps will be a bigger part of that going forward. To go back to your question, as you may know, there was a letter written by major energy groups, two of which were our members of EDSO. Back in 2021, estimating about 50 million heat pumps. We still think that's broadly correct overall in the EU. But that being said, there could be difficulties in certain areas, or it could just take longer in certain areas. Notably in the Netherlands right now, you may know that there are a lot of delays in new connections. There's been a big increase in the demand for new connections, and so that's really a challenge for DSOs. I mean, some countries, the demand for the increase of new connections has increased 3 or 4 times just in a couple of years. So that's a really big issue in here and there. And so while broadly we think in the EU incorporating heat pumps into grids is something quite doable. There are places where there will be delays. I think it's also important to say that heat pumps, and I had mentioned electric vehicles, heat pumps don't, for DSOs, heat pumps are not something in isolation. So it's sort of, for the DSOs looking at, well, what about charging points for electric vehicles? What about how much solar PV or other decentralized production is going online within their distribution area? What kind of appliance sales are there? Other kinds of appliance sales? Are they smarter or not? Are people buying conventional but much more efficient boilers and so forth, heating? So all these things, all these other factors play into a particular distribution grid's ability to to incorporate more heat pumps into the system, as well as the heat pumps themselves. I mean, the heat pumps themselves can be positive for the grid. I mean, they can be a positive part of flexibility, and so they could help as well. It's not just a burden, but that is to say, just because now we could take 50 million, that doesn't mean in 10 years we necessarily will be able to. It could be higher, it could be lower, depending on what the situation is with all these other factors, as well as legislative effects that may happen. It's also important. I defer to my colleagues here on the legislation, but I think it's also important to mention things like the network code on demand side response, and the degree to that, and that being incorporated and being effective and implemented effectively. The degree to which legislation is actually implemented, which is still a lot of legislation that's not effectively implemented right now, or will just take time to implement. So we'll see how long that takes. So yeah, I think I'll end with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just to come back on the different perspectives provided, what I heard Mr. Moser actually say, now it's really up to implementation, up to a lot of things at the national level. And maybe I would like to come back to Dr. Schiefelbein. Do you think that is enough to just now look at the national level and how these current legislations will be implemented? Or would you see need for additional measures or additional signals at EU level in the next months or years?
I definitely hope that the Heat Pump Action Plan in Europe will be implemented after the next election and from the new Commission. It will be extremely helpful if the new Commission does it as one of the first steps it's taking, because then they also have some time to actually implement it. I think that's extremely important, because for all the heat pump manufacturing companies, the national markets are quite small if you just look on the national markets. So we are in comparison with worldwide companies now. And Mr. Lange mentioned correctly that one of our competitors has been bought by a US company. And I'm, let's say 99.9% sure that there will be other companies being bought by Chinese companies. That's normal to a certain extent. If we want it on a European level is a different question. So we do need a European framework to enable industry to act, because all the national markets are too small. So the total implementation cannot only be done on a national basis. That's quite important. If you compare the European market for heat pumps with the other markets that are big, then in Europe we had a market of some 2.2 million heat pumps in 2021. At the same time, we did have a market of approximately 4 million heat pumps in the US, and we did have a market of 12.5 million heat pumps in China. So that's where we are in international competition. So even Europe, if you take it together, all the European countries, we are definitely not the biggest market on the world, and so we do need European action. We do need a European heat pump implementation plan if we want to keep the heat pump, or if we want to keep a heat pump industry in Europe. So if we don't want, and if we say, we don't care, PV is also from China, then of course, maybe you do not need a European implementation plan. But if you want to keep the industry here, then you must do something. I would be more than happy to live in a world without subsidies and without national egoisms and without all the ways of doing unfair trade that we are facing today. But I'm not living in such a world. And if we try to do everything in the perfectly beautiful way in Europe, and then we can't make sure that the others are acting as beautifully as we do, and then we are losing again and again and again. And I think the PV industry in Germany is a brilliant example how you can mess things up. then we do have to do something, and we should do it on a European level, because the time for nations acting independently, it should be over if you are living on the European continent that is simply too small if you compare it to other big nations in the world.
Thank you. I would like to go back to Mr. Lange. You mentioned indeed we want to secure these jobs in Europe, so that's very related to what has just been raised by Dr. Schiefelbein. So how do you see that the Parliament can actually really act on this also in the next legislative period to really combine these Green Deal policies with more the competitiveness and the industry and creating jobs? Which concrete actions could be taken?
Yeah, I'm really, really sure that in the next legislative term, the question of sustainable competitiveness will be in the center of policy. No doubt about, because, as Mr. Schiefenbein just said, our trading partners are not playing fair. We have the United States with the Inflation Reduction Act. By the way, some technology from transition is going now to the United States. Small green hydrogen producers, HIF, is going to Texas. Meyer-Brunner solar panel is going to Colorado Springs. Volkswagen battery factory is going to Ontario in Canada, getting 9 billion euro subsidies over 10 years. 9 billion subsidies. So, and we have China, the overcapacity, going in the direction using overcapacity also as an, let's say, trade weapon, and so on and so on. And therefore, we have to focus how to strengthen our sustainable competitiveness inside Europe. I'm not arguing now for a protective way or decoupling way, because we are so involved and diversified in trade relation to other countries. We have an openness rate compared to our GDP from around 40%. United States have 13%. So we are really depending on trade and relation to other countries, and therefore decoupling and protective measures is not a solution for us. So we have to strengthen our competitiveness. And we heard that, for example, the price for electricity is too high. So we are just discussing the new electricity market regulation. And I hope that we can go even a little bit further regarding industrial pricing for electricity. We need also to give, let's say, meat to the bone of the Net Zero Industrial Act. So we have some targets and some sectors, but no money at the moment. And having really the possibility to create jobs for the future, we need also to support this process. So we need perhaps a next generation EU project for the energy transition, so that we really can support this with fresh money. And I guess also the question of strengthen the possibilities to be competitive also on the international market is an important issue. So there are a lot of elements which are possible to give such industries also in future in Europe. And this is, I guess, the main task, not only regarding the transition, but also to save good jobs, good paid jobs in Europe.
Okay, I would like to actually pick up on the point you mentioned on the Net Zero Industry Act. You say we need to provide meat to the bone. In the Net Zero Industry Act, there's this benchmark of 40% of the clean tech industries provided in Europe, installed in Europe, should be produced in Europe. With the heat pump sector, we are actually at more than 60%. So we see that the Net Zero Industry Act is quite, how do you say, overarching over different technologies, and to provide meat to the bone, one thing could be really to look more technology specific. Also again regarding this competitiveness and so on. Mr. Moser, do you see any of such actions possible in the next legislative period? And also regarding the funding that has been mentioned by Mr. Lange, how do you look at that for the coming months and years?
Thank you, Josephine. I think it's not necessarily new legislation. It's making sense out of what we have now as a framework through good policies at European level, but also national level, which are not necessarily based directly on new legislation. It's the national systems for taxation that they are thought through in terms of signals. It's bringing on track the financing from the EU side. There will be a new multi-annual financial framework, which, however, will not to be expected provide more funding than now, rather less, because there will not be any more the recovery and resilience facility. Even more a reason to use public financing as wisely as possible, as targeted as possible, and incentivize, bring in private funding. There are enough volumes in the private financial sector, but the investment cases, the business cases for investments need to be created, and the framework conditions be created by combining public and private funding, taking over some risks, and in a very targeted manner those who need it, and where people don't need it, where it's already profitable for them to do the investment, there we don't need that. But we will have to be very targeted here, otherwise the money will not be enough. The times of using relatively large volumes of funding in some member states from the Recovery and Resilience Facility will not be repeated. There are no plans to do that. There's no willingness to feed another large fund like that. At the moment, we don't know what happens in the future, but at the moment we don't see that. And then, of course, we need to see also how we can scale up numbers, especially of heat pumps, in order to reduce also the prices, because heat pumps are still considered by many as relatively expensive, and probably there are from the initial investment. So the question is, is it possible to make them simpler, installments simpler, but also or the installation simpler, and bring down prices. So I know it's hard, because you have now even a situation of relatively less than expected sale numbers, but in the end, what matters is indeed, is it attractive enough for the market to take them up, to buy them? It's international competition, but also competition amongst between different heat pump producers, but also between different solutions. Will people take that up? And then will information be also accurate and to the point from the future advisory centers, one-stop shops to be established by the member states, that citizens will be informed correctly what are the lifetime costs of the different heating and cooling solutions, to overcome wrong information which has often been circulated, even in the debate which we have seen so far, that heat pumps work only if you renovate the whole house. They cost you a fortune even as such, but if you have to renovate your house, you lose your entire retirement money which you wanted to use until the end of your life. And all these myths which have been created, they have to be fought against. People have to be informed what actually are the lifetime costs, how much do you need to invest, who can help you, what you need to know, in which buildings do they make sense, to rationalize very much this. Yeah? So to boost demand. I mean, we need to boost demand through the national energy and climate plans, through the national policies, also accompanying European action, but also then making sure that people feel confident to invest in them, to install them. And by boosting numbers, prices will also come down, and therefore the market will become more and more dynamic. That's what we hope, at least. The Heat Pump Action Plan, just also to, I would say, to manage expectations, will not be a new legislative program. This is basically an action plan to define the necessary actions at European, national, but also industry level, and at the level of installers, to simply take stock. What are the barriers? How do we overcome them? But in principle, these barriers are already known. So we are trying to implement some of the actions, like an accelerator from the Commission side already before that. So this will not be the one single program which boosts heat pumps. This is basically accompanying and reinforcing implementation efforts and defining a common agenda. But it's not basically a revolutionary, it cannot be a revolutionary new thing, creating a legislative or even a financial volume to a European program to boost heat pumps. That is not possible at this stage. Just to manage expectation in that respect. Yeah? So
there's no political will. Possible might be.
Yes, maybe, yeah. So maybe if you had now a specific financing program for that, but I don't see that this would be coming. So, but we have lots of tools. We are not. I'm not speaking basically in a kind of desperate mood. We've now managed to put in place a very ambitious legislative framework, which we need to implement. So in principle, I'm in a very good mood. I mean, from a European Commission point of view. A lot has been achieved, and I would say much more than initially maybe was considered to be possible. That there's now, to some extent, a kind of consideration of other aspects, and they are not really other aspects. Competitiveness is very important. Simplification is normal. This happened already several times in the past. You develop in one direction, you make a big step forward, and then you think, well, actually, there are some other things also to be done. Competitiveness needs to be brought forward. Simplification. This is, of course, the natural consequence of having made a very big step in one field, just to make sure it remains balanced, and that we need to take seriously. So I think it's not that I would be in a gloomy mood and say now everything will be put into question again and we go back. No, this will not happen. What we need is integration, system integration. There, the link to grid planning, distribution, but also transmission grids, energy storage. This needs to be thought through thoroughly through the national energy and climate plans. Where are the bottlenecks? How do we solve them? And what money is also needed, how much is needed, and where are the skills gaps, research innovation gaps, and that industry gets also clear signals, what is the public policy side, so that they can invest. And I do recognize that it has been unfortunate. We were not hoping that there would be such a kind of, I would say, reduction in sales numbers. But to some extent, you are also an industry, of course, and this has happened in many other industries before. There are cycles, ups and downs, and hopefully this will be a short and I would say stoppable downturn. And normally, from the policy signals, they should move up relatively quickly and in a sustained manner again. Yeah? So.
Okay, as much as I would like to give everyone the same amount of questions, I also need to look at the time, and I want to also give some time to the public. But first, I want to give Mr. Schiefelbein the possibility also to react, because there were many calls to industry, I believe, to, for example, reduce costs and so on. So what would you react to that?
I think on a lot of points, Mr. Moser and I can agree quite easily. There are some tasks to be done to make the heat pump market sustainable, and of course, reducing the cost for the heat pump is an industry job. It's our job, and we can do this. We can have more functional integration of the heat pumps. We can have a higher degree of automation in the production. We can have more modularity. But we must be frank. If we have highly integrated hydraulic parts made of plastic, for example, which is possible, that costs money. We have to invest. That doesn't come for free. And if we want to, just as an example, replace traditional tube and coil heat exchangers by microchannel heat exchangers, that has the potential to bring down the cost substantially, but investing in the technology, again, costs money. So yes, we have to bring down the cost of the product, and that's our industry job. There's a job that politicians have to do, because we can't, and that is bringing down electricity prices. Because the two things that create the unwillingness of end customers to invest in heat pumps are cost of the heat pump, our job, and cost of the operation of the heat pumps, and that's a politician's job, because we can't do it. And if we want to have the energy transition, and for sure we cannot reach our climate targets without the heat pump, the energy consumption in the building sector is just too high, and there are not enough alternative approaches to reduce the CO2 emissions in the heating sector. It's mostly the heat pump. So the biggest burden has to be the biggest part of it has to be done by the heat pump. There is no alternative. So that's bringing down energy prices. And then, of course, we would be happy if we could get some support, and also Mr. Moser already mentioned this. So I also think there is, so if we have to bring down the prices, and if we have to increase the competitiveness of the product compared to other systems or compared to products coming from somewhere else, for example, China or the US, then we have to invest. And it's true, Mr. Moser, that there is enough money available. So yes, the banks have enough money. But the banks in Europe are, due to good reasons, a bit averse to taking risks. That's also okay, because we know what can happen if the banks are not averse to taking risk. We all remember the financial crisis, no question about that. So it's good that basically the banks are averse to taking risks. But I do not think that it would cost the governments and also Europe too much money to give guarantees for credits or loans that are given out by the banks, because the banks, they are no heating experts. They are no energy transition experts. And if we tell them, okay, the covenants will not look so nicely over the next 5 years, but in principle it's the right decision, then they say it's possible, but we don't know it, and our risk department doesn't know it. And so if politicians could give guarantees for the loans that companies have to take to do the necessary invest, that would really be nice. And probably because European companies, especially family-owned businesses, they are not used to wasting money. So the risk that the guarantee would have to be paid to the banks in the end, it's quite small. Because all those little companies like Stiebel Eltron, or even a bit less little Weiland or whomever, or Atlantique or whatever, all these family companies, they do care for the people who are working for them. And my owner, Dr. Theodor Stiebel, and his brother Frank Stiebel, they would kill me if I would gamble with their money. So basically, those companies are quite conservative, but still persuading the banks who do not know about the business, it's a bit tricky, and their politicians could help us.
Thank you very much. Yeah, looking at the time, I would really like to also involve the public and see if there's any questions from your side. We also have some online participants, so if there's no questions from the room, we can also look at that. Yes. Can you introduce yourself, your name and your organization?
Thank you very much. Janis Vogtmanis. I work for Turquoise. We are venture capital in the clean tech space. I have 2 questions, one for Dr. Schieferbein, which is more technical, and perhaps one for MEP Bernd Lange on the politics. Dr. Schieferbein, when I listened to your presentation of the state of the market, it seems to me you need more resilience. Your customers need resilience in their systems. So that you have fluctuations in the schemes that they can reach into. You have fluctuation in the electricity price. Have you looked at storage systems and the combination of heat pumps and storage, especially in the industry market, to try and look for solutions in this? So that you become more independent of the actual, shall we say, volatility you're experiencing from the politics and from the prices. And for MEP, for Mr. Lange, we have had a very good time in climate and energy policy. Looking back 20 years, things have gone very, very well. And also the Green Deal has now been put on its feet, and congratulations to you, the Commission, for having done this. But now we're seeing, shall we say, pulling back from some member states. We see doubts arising. Do you think that the implementation of the Green Deal, not at EU level, even with reduced MFF, but in the member states, will actually take off at the speed that we need?
Yeah, talking about energy storage, yes, of course, that's an option. So the combination of heat pumps and PV is indeed quite attractive for the people who can afford to invest in both. Adding energy storage to the PV system today is basically a bit expensive. So for the people who are really calculating what they are doing, this kind of independence has a price, and the price is not small. That might change with the energy storage is becoming cheaper. But the problem is that if you want to become independent with a heat pump, then at least you have to store the energy over the night, and that results in batteries that are quite big. So if you just build the batteries to store the energy over the night, that's probably too expensive. Being able to use batteries from electric cars in their second life, which I think should be possible because we do not need the high capacity of loading and unloading the batteries. And we also, in the house, we do not mind if the battery is a bit bigger and a bit more heavy because we need a bit more cells because the cell efficiency has decreased. So second life batteries from cars could be a good option. If you have to produce the batteries to store the energy for the heat pump, then today that's not economically feasible. So you need people with a lot of money and a lot of idealism to sell such products to them. Industrial customers are, so far, heat pump is a brilliant solution for a lot of industrial customers, but industrial companies are even more conservative than end customers. The advantage of the end customer is if you can tell him that he has an amortization time of 10 years and he's either German or Swiss or Austrian, then you have a good chance of selling the system to him. If you tell an industry company, we have a brilliant idea where you can put your money and you have an amortization time of 10 years, then you should be fast in running away from the CFO of the company. So that makes it a bit tricky.
Good to have an expert in venture capital here. So it's quite unique. I was recently in Silicon Valley and they told me 1/3 of global venture capital is distributed in Silicon Valley. So we need more of you, so that we have also the possibility to have technology supported here in Europe. No, we have in our legislation also national targets. They have to fulfill it. It's totally clear. This was one of the major issues in the negotiation with the Council, that we not have only abstract target for the European Union, but concrete target also for the member states, and they have to implement it. And then, of course, as Stefan Moser said, there are huge amount of measures to support the implementation process. And I think he was not talking about the German example of the heating legislation. It was really a mess, and we need really a different approach for the proper implementation. And sometimes, I guess, we need also some subsidies. We changed the state aid framework so that some subsidies are possible. And I have some member states in my mind where the situation is even worse than in Germany, where I guess some subsidies are necessary for specifically regional planning and use of heating pumps in the future.
Mr. Esser would also like to react.
Sorry. Yes, I just wanted to go back a bit to this question of what can be done a little bit. And I just wanted to mention a couple of technical things and then go back to this policy question a bit. One thing is non-firm or alternative connection agreements, which is something being implemented a bit in a few places, but I think we'll see it more and more, which is, if the grid is congested, well, the people can agree to, let's say, have a time of day where the capacity is not guaranteed, or the capacity, or they even just agree that the capacity is what the distribution system operator will give them, and they'll deal with that, and this may allow more connections. So they're definitely, we're used to, well, it's either a firm connection with this much capacity or that's it. But actually, you can do other things. So that's one thing. Another thing is having on the heat pump itself, of course, smart controls that are linked to the flexibility of the grid, and the more that's implemented, the more that we can take advantage of the flexibility in heat pumps, the better. I would say, also, I mean, it's important to remember that distribution system operators are heavily regulated entities. They're regulated monopolies for, I think, fairly obvious reasons. You're not going to have two or three grids on top of each other. It's just not efficient. But so that means that their rate of return and the way that they invest is very different from say heat pump companies, which are competing on a free market, or hopefully a fairly free market. Dr. Schiffelbein can say better than me that. But so I think the point I'm trying to make is it's very important that if we're going to incorporate all these heat pumps, that we have the right regulatory framework that allows the kind of investments that are needed for that. I just was speaking to a CEO of a distribution system operator this morning, who, well, his company covers half of a member state, and he said he could borrow all the money he wanted, but the regulatory framework wouldn't allow him to use it. I think for the next commission, the next parliament, a real important thing is enabling a regulatory framework that allows the kind of investments that we need, so that we actually can actualize the national energy and climate plans. I think right now, with the kind of frameworks we have, we're actually not going to make it. I think there was a study on the TSO level that showed that already, but I think it's true on the DSO level as well. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? No? Okay. And online? Also not. Okay. Yes.
If I'm allowed, I would like to, because Mr. Lange, who is mostly saying what I would also say, just he knows more about politics. But in one point, I would like to contradict a bit. So the German building efficiency law, yes, we do suffer a bit from it now. That's true. But on the other hand, to say that it's a completely bad example, it's also not completely true. It's an action plan that implements measures for the targets that have been decided by the government before, the one we have now. And just setting targets and doing nothing, in the industry, we would never even dream about it, because it doesn't work. So we did need the implementation plan, and the building energy law actually is an implementation plan. It also, yeah, there could have been some points. So there are some lessons learned, true. But so first of all, it is an implementation plan, and second, it has been done with a broad commitment of groups who are in some way interested. So there have been heat pump summits, and the Ministry of Economy has worked hard to get the commitment of the installers, of the industry, of everyone to bring these 500,000 heat pumps into the market in 2024. I would say they would have liked to have this year. It will never happen. But you could see that there can be a tremendous impact if you actually want to do something and if you want to do it together. Then there is another positive aspect of the building energy law, and that's that there is now a legal framework for the transition away from the fossil fuels to renewable energy. Of course, there is a delay of until 2026 for some communities, big communities until 2028 for the smaller communities, so it's not perfect, but there is a legal framework. Then and of course Mr. Lange says correctly that the communication could have been a bit better. Then if you look at the details, there is at least one thing that could have been done a bit smarter. So the opposition against this law has been formed mainly because people were afraid that they would not be able to pay what is demanded by them. And if politicians had done the steps in the right sequence and had reduced the electricity prices before writing and communicating the building efficiency law, then I would say 80% of the opposition would never have happened, because people would not have been afraid that they are not able to afford it. Then if the subsidy program that is now really quite good in Germany, if this subsidy program would have, and that also has a social component, which is extremely important. So if this subsidy program had been in place before the building efficiency law had been communicated, then we would not have had all this mess. So the bones, the frame is good. The measures that are in place now are also good. And basically, electricity prices should have been corrected before communicating it, and subsidy program should have been in place before implementing it. And you could have got rid of 80% of the opposition. And then there is another nice point where it would be good if politicians would look 2 or 3 or 4 steps ahead. This would also help them in playing chess, by the way. So if they would do it, then if they say to the industry, you make sure we get 500,000 heat pumps into the market by 2024, and you sign for it, and we did sign for it. All the industry did sign for it. Then you must be aware that the industry has to invest. And then even politicians could know that the investment is not all financed from the cash flow. So it would be great if the politicians had something in place in case that the market does not come to help the industry who had to do a commitment. So then leaving the industry alone and say, it's economic cycles, bad luck for you, we are so sorry, that's a bit not so nice.
I see Thomas has a question.
Yes, Thomas Nowak, Secretary General of the European Heat Pump Association. I need to jump on that topic because Stefan, you have said it's an economic cycle, so we hope that it recovers. Mr. Lange, you have said roughly the same, so we think that it will happen in 2030, so if it's not happening now, well, let's see. But we have a commission president that has proposed to the member states 90% CO2 emission reduction by 2040. So now we are moving the target a bit outwards, but make it more ambitious. The impact assessment on which this is based foresees 60 million heat pumps. We can say with the current drop, it's going to be more and more difficult. So I would fully chime in with Kai. Do you see anything that can happen at the moment? Because this heat pump action plan would have, we know, a symbolic value, but now it's not there. So now we see people, we see venture capitalists that say, should we continue to invest in Europe? Or is this postponement actually a change in position? And I would ask the same question to Bernd Lange is, do you see that your colleagues in the parliament, do they take it serious? We're not trying to save the solar industry that we have lost. Do we need to lose the industry to Asia, to the United States, to wherever else before we take enough action to bring it back? Or can we bring enough clout together to take some action now?
No, it's totally clear, and I mentioned it, I guess, twice today, that we really looking to industrial structure and workplace in Europe. And I totally support the industrial concept or plan the Commission presented in February last year, and we took after that also some measures. And we are also ready, and I mentioned the change in the state aid framework, to give state aid if necessary, and also matching the same amount like the US is offering. We have this example from Northvolt batteries in Heide. So we have to really be alert that there is a risk of deindustrialization, and we have to avoid that, and we have to take action in a proper way. So I recognize quite well the lot of ifs you mentioned. So, and this is also, I guess, necessity for good legislation, to have a proper foresight, what is happening and how we can do a proper impact assessment, and also a little bit ex post analysis, what has happened, even readjust a bit the concrete measures. But totally clear, we have to take action to not looking to deindustrialization in another sector, no doubt about it.
Anyone else wants to react? No? Yes, but I'm looking at the timing. We are already running a bit late, but okay. Well, let's do one more question. No, you can come here. Okay. So the question is, why don't the manufacturers use the possibility to generate carbon credits to support funding of the heat pump? So that's a question for Mr. Schiefelbein.
I would say it's not. We don't have an ETS for heating yet. No. So the ETS2 is being prepared and it will help. Sorry, yeah, it's not a question for the industry because today, as far as I know, we can't because there is no CO2 trading system for the heating sector. So also no credits and nothing to finance something. If the ETS2 is coming and the European Commission and the European Parliament, they are luckily working on it and we are very much looking forward to it because it will again be a stable framework and not something as volatile as the German CO2 prices that we have today. So then we will be happy to use it, of course, and we are looking forward to the regulation. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Then, yes, we have another question in the room.
Yes, good evening, Philip Garrick from JDF and Hybrid Heating Europe. I have one question. We speak about the electric prices, but we know that we are going to have more and more flexible dynamic tariff. Will that help your business cases and may that help your congestion problem? Can we have kind of a one-size-fits-all?
Very, very easy answer. Heat pump provide the possibility of flexibility, so we can make use of the energy at the moment when it is cheap or available. And we can, of course, there is a limit to the flexibility, but there is quite a lot of flexibility. And I do not know if you are aware of the EEBUS initiative that is supported by the ZVEI, for example, and also by the German heating industry, where the use cases, how to make use of flexible tariffs are developed. And we are all implementing the algorithms, even if we do not have them on the controller hardware today, because it's a bit, today we couldn't use it because there are no offers, but the use cases are developed and we will be able to provide flexibility and we will be able to allow our customers to use attractive electricity prices automatically by optimization algorithms that we implement into our controllers when it's available, and it will help us a lot. Yes.
Yes. Hello. So okay. Yes, definitely. I mean, I agree completely. Indeed, and having the heat pumps, having the AI that supports those algorithms, indeed, is important, and it's something we think can save money and investments in these, because there are huge investments that have needed to be made in the grids. But to the degree that you can use this, we think this is a cost savings. And so, indeed, on the distribution side, having the regulatory framework and the technology at scale to implement this is something that we're eager to do.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, perhaps on the question before on the ETS2 for buildings, this will coming into force in 2027. So a little bit time to go. And then, of course, we have to look a little bit also to the social consequences of this. So we want to create this social climate fund to get also support for small households. So there will be some work for the implementation for this as well, but then of course it's also possible to get some credits on that.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we could keep discussing. There's still a lot of questions. We had prepared many more, but yeah, we also, I think some of us could maybe be hungry, so let's finalize here. So my main conclusions from the discussions is that first of all, the Green Deal is here, and now it needs to be implemented properly, and there's no scaling back on green policies that has been clearly said both from the side of the Commission and the Parliament. However, the next Commission will have to look at competitiveness and at this heat pump action plan implementation. There, they could also probably learn from the German example and really also think, a few steps ahead and do the proper process involving all stakeholders and so on. And then focusing on the grid perspective, there we see that there's quite some solutions possible. The flexibility is there, but there's still quite some legislation needed to properly unlock the benefits that heat pumps flexibility can bring. Yeah, and another key message that is very important also, what we, as EHPA, one of our key messages is really this need to bring down the electricity to gas price ratio. That's, something that I think everyone clearly agrees on. So thank you very much to the panelists, and also thank you very much to Stiebel Eltron and the Lower Saxony region for co-organizing with us. Also, thank you to my colleagues from EHPA, and in specific Aurelia, who has been organizing this in a very great way. Thanks a lot. And then, I invite everyone for the walking dinner, which will take place, I think, to that side. But I think my colleagues will guide you. So thank you very much, and good appetit.